The ITIL Intermediate Qualification. Planning, Protection and Optimization. Module 2, Demand Management. Lesson 2, Policies, Principles and Basic Concepts. Welcome to Module 2, Lesson 2. In this lesson we'll study Supply and Demand, Gearing Service Assets, and Demand Management through the Lifecycle. The diagram on the screen illustrates the tight coupling between the demand for service and the resources needed to satisfy it. This is a major difficulty that has to be addressed by a provider of services. It is not a problem for a provider of goods, though. In the case of the provider of goods, there is a substantial buffer between its production line and the buyer. When demand is low, the provider simply continues to manufacture and stores the goods in a warehouse until demand increases. This allows much easier management of changing demand. The situation of a service provider is different. The demand for service is tightly coupled with supply. On the one hand, the resources to deliver the service must be available at the instant that demand occurs. On the other hand, if there is no demand, then the resources are idle and the service provider is inefficient. Unlike the provider of goods, the service provider cannot stockpile units of service. You, the student, are directly connected to our servers and are consuming our processing power. It is difficult for us to manage the demand for that power. We need to manage our service to make sure that it meets your expectations even when levels of demand change. The diagram demonstrates the need for demand management. Demand management identifies the potential demand, its magnitude and its timing, and the impact of that demand on underpinning resources. Capacity management uses that knowledge to manage the resources so as to satisfy demand in a cost-effective way. The use of virtualization and other technologies allows very flexible use of some types of resource. Service providers now can rapidly increase resources in anticipation of expected demand. For effective balancing of supply and demand, it is not enough just to respond to demand as it arrives. Demand must also be forecast. Some demand follows regular patterns over time. Other demand is triggered by business events. For example, a sales campaign. From a service management perspective, achieving an optimal balance requires service portfolio management, which will identify the services and link them to business processes. Always remember that many IT resources are shared, so demand for a service cannot be considered in isolation. All sources of demand for that finite set of resources must be considered together. Demand management, which will identify and quantify patterns of business activity and their impact on service demand. And architectural design, which will select an architecture that permits the demand to be satisfied in the most appropriate way. In some cases, the flexibility provided by virtualization technologies will be appropriate. In other cases, it might be better to allocate dedicated resources. For example, shared resources do introduce an element of risk that would be undesirable for an air traffic control system. Achieving an optimal balance also requires capacity management to ensure that sufficient resources are available to meet anticipated demand by producing and maintaining a capacity plan. Availability management to ensure that the resources are actually working and available when they are needed. And performance management and tuning to handle variations in demand. Forecasts of demand are always just estimates. They will provide a broad picture of future demand, but within that big picture are random, unpredictable variations and trends that have to be managed. Capacity management takes a lead in managing these operational and tactical issues. Okay, time for an exercise. Demand management is active across the service lifecycle. What activities does demand management perform in each stage? Plan to spend 20 minutes on this exercise, And don't forget to check out your study guide for some ideas that we've had.